Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We have a show today that is pretty much a continuation of things that we've spoken about before on the show, but it's really important. We have a lot of people out there who have cognitive issues, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, whatever you want to call it. And there are lots of drugs out there, but they don't really work very well. I can tell you that Aricept is a horrible drug. These people end up with all sorts of other symptoms, delirium, anxiety. And like we learned from Dr. Dale Bredesen, dementia, Alzheimer's disease is a lifestyle disease. We give it to ourselves over time. We make a lot of bad decisions and it shows up. I love shows like this because we're going to talk about things that can possibly affect it. For those of us who are concerned about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or we have family members. So this is going to be a great show with Dr. Stephen Malin. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name properly. I'll ask him as soon as he gets on the air. Of course, we have to thank our title sponsor, and that is Legendary Foods. They now make the sweet rolls. If you are in the airport and you think, man, I'd like to eat a Cinnabon, but I know how bad they are for me. Well, now you can enjoy all of the flavor without any of the guilt. It comes in cinnamon, chocolate, and wild berry. The sweet rolls are amazing. 20 grams of high-quality protein, 5 grams of net carbs if you're like me and you watch your carbohydrate intake, and 1 gram of sugar. But you won't be able to tell because you think you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 so that they know where you learned about them. They are our title sponsor, and they really do make this show possible. They really do. And without further delay, let me bring my guest on. And we can open up this microphone. And Stephen, did I pronounce your last name right? Malin?
It's Malin.
Malin. Okay, Malin. Okay. I got it. Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We've had interesting connecting the dots. Rutgers University, I had a scientist on in 2006 or 2007 that published a study that showed how caffeine increases blood sugar levels in type 2 diabetics. It was a fascinating study. Very well done. And it really did start to show. In fact, they did 2 studies. The second study, they were able to cut the doses of diabetic drugs that these individuals were using by half when they cut caffeine out of their diet. Fascinating. No one talks about that. There's a Starbucks on every corner or 2, and people, drink gallons of it a day. But anyway, yeah. But I've had quite a few scientists from Rutgers on over the years. There was one. I think his his name was Paul Godley. He published a position paper for the American Cancer Society that showed that androgens were not linked to prostate cancer. And another study that no one talks about, it's like, it's sad, but Rutgers is just a phenomenal university for putting out valuable science. And unfortunately, not all of it gets paid attention to, as you realize in science in general. So tell me about your work. You're actually in the physiology lab, right? You're a sports physiology guy, right?
Sure. Yeah. So studying kinesiology, I tell everybody I have one of the best jobs. I get to talk about exercise and food all day long. What else would be better, right?
Right.
No, but that's right. My background's kind of interesting. I don't think I know many professors that actually start off their life thinking one day when they were a kid, I want to be a professor when I grow up. For me, kind of the comment I got from my parents all the time was, you should be a medical doctor. You do well in these science classes. You should really think about that. Teachers told me the same thing. But I was a jock at heart. I played sports all the time, whether it was football, basketball, track and field, you name it, I was doing it. And it really just promoted that love of really thinking one day, wait, there are people studying this stuff with also biochemistry and all the other kind of fascinating areas of science. So it really prompted me to go that direction, get away from medicine per se. But then here I am studying really type 2 diabetes, obesity, and some of these risk factors for how they come about. So I am in the Department of Kinesiology and Health. And then I have secondary appointments in the Department of Medicine, and specifically the Division of Endocrinology and Metabolism.
So how did you get to this? What research preceded your study that made you want to do this?
That's a great question. Again, it's amazing how these paths come forward. So again, being the exercise person, skeletal muscle was the big interest. And for me, thinking about type 2 diabetes, that's something that affected our family. My mother had type 2 diabetes. I grew up seeing it all the time, medicines, going to doctor's appointments, diets, all this kind of stuff. And it really just made me wonder, what can I do to help? And how can we get involved in this? And thinking about exercise, we think it's a powerful drug. We talk about all these medications like, you were at the beginning of the conversation. But the reality is, I agree with you. We have one of the best medicines out there. It's called exercise. It's an amazing drug if we think about it. So we as a group tend to think of it that way. How do we prescribe it? What should people eat before and after? How much sleep do you need to optimize that effect? And for us then getting towards the brain, we were thinking for skeletal muscle and how skeletal muscle is really important for clearing blood glucose. And we know in that way that'll help regulate type 2 diabetes risk. But at the same time, if glucose levels are too high in the blood, we also know that can affect your vasculature and it can actually dampen your blood flow. So that can cause a lot of macrovascular, microvascular diseases like atherosclerosis, hypertension, and so forth. So as we started, really thinking about this more and more, those are actually collectively all these factors that impact our brain. And starting to look into the connections, kind of historically, some people have called Alzheimer's a type 3 diabetes. So starting to really ask those questions, why? What is going on there? How do we get into that? Well, here we are now, starting to try to understand these links between the body.
My audience is expecting me to tell a story right now.
Okay.
I started using the term type 3 diabetes 12 or 13 years ago, specific to the brain, insulin resistance specific to the brain. And we were out to dinner about 11 years ago for a good friend's birthday at Ruth Chris. And she had invited all these friends. Some of us knew each other, some didn't. And so I was introduced to the couple that was sitting across from Elisa and I, and he was a neurosurgeon. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. He and I are going to have great, lively conversations tonight. And so I opened with, have you seen some of the research that Alzheimer's disease may be linked to insulin resistance of the brain? And with that, he said to me, really smug, it's not that simple. And then he turned and gave me his shoulder for the rest of the night. Wow. And I thought, wow. I thought, yeah, like not even like curious, like, where did you hear that? I have a relative who is a geneticist, and I told her that the brain produces its own insulin on demand in emergencies. And she said, that's nonsense, and she's a geneticist. She works with pigs. Like she just blew me away. And I sent her a study that said it. She never replied. So it's funny when some of these emerging things, which is all we talk about for 17 years on this show, all I do is have people who are burning new paths come on and tell me about it. And when you talk to some of the people that are entrenched in the day-to-day, they just dismiss you immediately. That's impossible. Now, here we are, like for the past 13 years, we've been talking about insulin and the brain. And it's fascinating to me. It really is.
It's hard, that way. I agree with you. We face that all the time in academia. It takes years to do these studies, number one, and then you get these results and people aren't going to accept it right away. There's a lot of questioning and debate. And in many ways, you have to do even more work to confirm and refute that process, which in a way is good because it gives us that confidence that this is either going to be real or it's not. But at the same time, it's so frustrating, I think, for our public, all of the people who are trying to figure out what can I do to live better and just be one with well-being. So I hear you.
We all love the rigors of science, right? Like there's studies that have been done one time. A man who is known as the godfather of the pineal gland, Dr. Russell Ryder, he's in his 80s. He's still teaching at UC at Dallas, I believe. At University of Texas at Dallas. Brilliant man. He's authored like 600 papers on the pineal gland and its primary hormone, melatonin. And there was this one study that came out of France, I think, and where they took the pineal gland out of old rodents and grafted it into the young rodents and vice versa. And the old rodents got young, phenotypically young, and the young rodents got old. And he said, it's a fascinating study, he goes, but it's never been reproduced. Like, we don't know why that happened. It could have been a quirk. There could have been something else going on. And unless you can reproduce it, then real scientists are going to call bullshit. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree with you. And that is the process. It's not perfect by any means, but it does help us kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of things. And I think try to find the truth,
right,
or at least as close to we as we can.
At the end of the day, we're not selling anything. We're just trying to find the truth because we want to employ it. We want to use these techniques to live longer and longer. So let's talk about your particular study. How was it designed?
Yeah. So, for us here, what we were doing in this particular work right now is a literature review. Okay. So to stay here, what we were doing was trying to do a systemic literature review and understand the field. Because to your point, Carl, there's been a lot of talk about insulin and just the pathology here of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and even Alzheimer-related dementias, vascular dementia and so forth. Lots of different types of dementia. So for us, we were really interested in thinking, okay, well, what does that literature say? And then at the same time, what is the exercise field saying about the brain? There's certainly some people like Kurt Erickson, who is a leader in the field of exercise for several years now, proposing and advocating for exercise being beneficial to the brain. Mm-hmm. And it's really been in more recent years with the advent of newer technologies and imaging capabilities that we're starting to get into understanding the brain. So for us, it was really a matter of starting to think about, okay, well, what's that world saying? And then at the same time, has anybody actually investigated this link between insulin, exercise, and the brain? And really, once we started boiling it down, we started to identify what we think are some gaps in our understandings in how we best, say, prescribe exercise or even just use exercise as a way to help the brain be better at using and responding to insulin. As really, there's only one study I know of testing this idea. And even then it was in younger people. So we were really kind of floored by that. And that study just came out actually after we wrote the paper. So it's something to say here. At the time, there really wasn't much out there.
So part of the problem, in my humble opinion, and we've talked about this tangentially on many shows over the years, that when research is like it's novel and recent to start using female rodents in studies. For decades, Female rodents were excluded because of that pesky estrogen hormone. So when pharmaceutical drugs were tested, they left females out. Now we realize, science as a whole realizes that was a huge mistake. And so now we are including female rodents. But something else that we've neglected, in my humble opinion, is not necessarily athletes and not weekend warriors either, but some of those people who train like athletes but don't necessarily do crazy shit because they're not competing at an athletic level. We don't look at that group of people epidemiologically and say what shifts when we start including these people. And I'm talking specifically about muscle. Okay. We have plenty of studies about cardio. We know runners can run themselves to death, but we don't have enough research on people who work to acquire not only muscle tissue, but the strength that it offers. And we know strong people live longer. So I don't understand why science just leaves them out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack with that. I love it. Even just going back to your estrogen point first, I think you're right. I think, the research in general of female health across the lifespan has just been underserved. Mm-hmm. And I think this notion of, the menstrual cycle confounds our ability to test these questions. I get it. I think there's understandings in that, sure. But it also limits the understanding of everything you're doing, because you basically just put it into a real funnel, and we just only know this in a really small microsphere that way. So I agree 100%. And that's where we've been really cognizant of that within our research. Over the years, I would say 70% or so of our participants, if not more, are women. And we've done this intentionally to try and better understand these questions and generalize the findings. That said, too, what's really fascinating to me is, and we're starting to try and do some work with premenopausal and postmenopausal women and understand responses to insulin. Given that we know women who undergo menopause do develop higher risk of cardiovascular disease and start developing more central obesity, that seems to be problematic from a general health standpoint. Mm-hmm. So, I bring that up because when we start thinking about exercise, this has been something that's really been concerning to me, is that when we say exercise is very good for improving your blood flow in the body, most people aren't going to balk at that. Everyone kind of would say, yeah, that's a no-brainer, of course. And it could be weightlifting or aerobic that way. It's going to increase blood flow. The problem seems to be when we talk about women across the lifespan, there's a different response here. And there's lots of great investigators, so don't mean to leave everybody or anybody out. But Carrie Moreau has been someone really leading this area out in Colorado. And what she's actually shown over the last couple of years is that when women who have undergone menopause now lose estrogen levels, and they do exercise, mostly aerobic exercise in her studies, but they find that the women are not improving their blood flow as much. But what happens is if they get hormone replacement therapy, all of a sudden now they start responding better again. So it really does your point, 100%. I'm gonna
clip this for social media.
Okay.
Because this is something we've tried to drive home for a long time. And there are people out there, mostly young people. This is usually young women. Menopause, just work harder, eat less. That's what they tell these people. They don't understand metabolically, postmenopausal women change. People fail to understand that estradiol is anabolic. And when I say that to people, they think I'm crazy. Well, look what happens when you give a cow trenbolone the last 6 months of its life to add muscle, lean mass. And look what happens when you give them trenbolone and estradiol benzoate. They put on 3 times more muscle. So the idea that estradiol is a bad thing, guys are always trying to suppress their estrogen, making themselves more prone to diseases like Parkinson's, by the way. But estradiol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. There is a receptor on every cell called the FACSM, I think it stands for fibroblast activation factor, that estradiol docks in at the moment of trauma. So like if you're driving in a car and you get a car accident, your head bangs the windshield, the thing that suppresses the brain from just going all out and swelling is estradiol is secreted. It's converted by aromatase in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So the androgens are converted to estradiol, and the estradiol docks in the FAF receptor, and it stops the swelling. So, we have this, to use my friend Joel Green's term, baby talk. We use baby talk when we talk about science. This is good. That's bad. It's not that way. It's not. Things are good and bad. And with that being said, there's a group of people out there who consider themselves nutritionists or personal trainers that think, oh, you're going through menopause. Don't worry. We just do more cardio. And these women don't lose weight. And part of the reason, and we did this study probably 6 years ago, when a woman's body wants estradiol and the ovaries can't deliver it, it upregulates lipogenesis, because the aromatase enzyme resides in fat cells, and then it converts any available androgens to estradiol. So women get fat possibly to maintain some form of estrogen in their body.
No, that's a really good point. A lot of people don't realize that our fat tissue or adipocytes, they can make estrogen. And this has actually helped, with some people with explanations of how is it that, cancer risk is increasing. And that's even another tie. Estrogen plays major roles in the body. And I agree with you, why we generally say something like, oh, estrogen is a sex hormone for females and testosterone is a sex hormone for men. That's even really not that true, because it's in both. Both men have and women have testosterone and estrogen. It's just the concentrations are so different. That's what it is. But people are shocked then to realize these things later on. So, again, to your point here, estrogen's important, as is testosterone. And, in many ways, from a vascular standpoint, we don't understand the roles of testosterone as well as we do estrogen in the vasculature and how that's playing roles. So again, I think there's some emerging work coming out on that topic right now. But, that ties into that other idea you were getting at, is muscle. And to say there, I think that's really a black box. Why don't we study weightlifting as much as aerobic exercise?
Because nobody wants to do it. In the words of Ronnie Coleman, nobody wants to lift heavy ass weight. That's it.
Yeah. There's probably there's a truth to that. It's hard enough to get people just to move, right? Like, at a simplest level. I think often so many people will say to me, Steve, what's the best exercise people can do? And I just say move. It's to a point now where we can sit here and debate optimal prescription plans. And I think that's good from a treatment efficacy standpoint, right? We need to know that. But at the same time, you look at national statistics, it's around 15% are meeting just guidelines. And those guidelines are really set up for more just general movement and aerobic exercise. So you start talking about weightlifting, to your point, it's a whole nother area. But I think in that regard, part of the reason may relate to vascular health again. I think a lot of people, you bring up fitness levels, in weightlifting, many people will talk about 1 repetition max as being sort of the standards here. From the aerobic side, though, it's your VO2 max. They want to know how much oxygen can you consume at maximal levels to produce energy aerobically. And in that regard, that's where you see resounding effects of VO2 fitness measurements on all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, independent of body weight. So Steve Blair coined the term years ago, it's better to be fit and fat than unfit and lean.
Right.
And I think that is a really powerful message too, as we are discussing this idea of obesity and gains in body weight, the problems with that. But a part of it is that we just may not be conditioned enough. So I think there's been this push towards ideas of really investigating the aerobic side of things and how that works in the body versus the weightlifting side.
But the problem is, we did a study. We covered a study with the manufacturers of the ARX machine, this advanced, you're working against a 2.5 horsepower motor, and it really accentuates the negatives. They did a study that showed that resistance training increases VO2 max because it makes the muscles more efficient to work with less oxygen. So, and that leads me to this one. What is exercise? Exercise is an artificial replacement for something we used to do 40,000 years ago, which was get up in the morning and move until it was time to go to sleep. And when we moved, we ran. And when we hunted, we lifted. And when we built structures, we lifted. So we had to come up with like, okay, we don't live like that now. We sit for 12 hours a day. So what do? So we go into the gym and we try to compensate in 40, 50, 60-minute intervals of doing what we were designed to do, which was move all day. So when we start debating which exercise is better, that's like saying, is it better to inhale or exhale? Oh, you got to do both. Oh, okay, I get it now. It's like silly.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be debating.
I agree with you. I think there's a reality that we need both, because you're not, like, to your point, right? And this is just in general, even now, right? We're constantly lifting things, whether it's kids, whether it's groceries, sofas, whatever it might be around the household, you're lifting at that time. So right. I think this notion of having to exercise can be a lot simpler. And we've kind of complicated things a bit. Even with the number of gyms, you look at it, over the last 10, 20 years, there are more gyms in the country than ever before. Yet we're not seeing declines in disease rates and obesity rates like we thought would happen if it's available. So it's not like that's going to be.
In fact, the gym industry has capitalized on something. What they've capitalized on is ultra low cost gyms, $9.95 a month. You join, you got the little thing on your keychain, and that mitigates your guilt for crapping on your body 24/7, because you're going to go to the gym. I'm going to start Wednesday. I'm going to start Thursday. I'm going to go. I have a gym membership. So see, I'm part of the gym club, but nobody's working out any different. Nobody's, and the other thing is, you can't just work out. You have to increase the quality of your workouts. This has to be some form of progression if you are really going to use this as a drug. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. And I think that's what's been interesting, kind of connecting your point there as you said that. It made me think a little bit about psychology, the cognitive effects that we're seeing. We're learning that by sitting a lot. We think about most people have desk jobs. I could tell you a story where we once had a participant in one of our studies, college student, was in the study, was doing great. It was a dietary study. The subject was just meeting all the expectations we would have. Then there was a washout period of 8 weeks. At that time, the student graduated. When they came back to the study, they had obtained a job, and we were all happy for that person. But the funny thing became, when we looked at their clinical characteristics, they had gotten worse. And we had wondered what happened. And then we asked, the person shared they got a desk job, and they were sitting more compared to before when they were on a college campus walking around all the time.
Right.
So you think about even just something like that. It's a small anecdote, but very much to your point. And what that does, I think, on some levels, what we've learned through a lot of great work, again, Kurt Erickson has really promoted a lot of these studies over the years, but physical activity, levels of fitness, movement patterns affect just how big our brains are. Because something people are sometimes surprised to learn is that our brains atrophy, just like a muscle. Muscles get smaller when you don't exercise, the brain starts to get smaller. And this occurs well before older age, as we start going from our 20s and 30s and 40s and so forth. This is occurring earlier, and it's potentially increasing these risk of disease. And that can start getting into some of the memory and cognitive defects that we're starting to see. So to your point, we might start feeling better, but in reality, we're not self-regulating ourselves. And we're then starting to fight our biology because we're not moving the way we were designed to move.
Oh, I agree. We have to take our first commercial break. It's a short one. When we come back, I want to introduce the discussion we had off the air and try to connect some dots, because physicians will tell people that as you age, you naturally become insulin resistant. And there is a morsel of truth to that. But I think I understand why this is. Our body doesn't know what a year is. It doesn't know that I'm 65 years old. All it knows is it has accumulated metabolic debris. And that debris accumulates pretty systematically across all of us, because we live on this planet and we come in contact with this stuff and we do these things. But I want to talk about iron when we come back, just for a moment, because there's some really good studies out there that show iron actually increases insulin resistance. And how much iron do we really need at the end of the day? How much did we have when we were kids and we were spry and jumping around and we could run all day, and then we get older and it's like, oh, your iron's kind of low. Well, how do you know? There's really no way to tell unless there's symptoms. Let's talk about that when we come back, okay? All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. It's a fascinating discussion. Don't forget to share this show. You never know who you're going to help. Stay tuned. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before.
Ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low-carb.
This is the Superhuman Channel, doing reps with the weight of the world.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Stephen Malin. We're talking about insulin resistance of the brain. This is a really important discussion because cognitive problems are happening. And I predict the things that are causing cognitive problems related to insulin resistance are causing other problems in the brain. The brain needs energy. Unless you're deep in ketosis or you're taking a ketone supplement, it needs glucose. And the efficiency in which it obtains glucose and the efficiency in which it enters cells so that it can be used can have a profound effect on your brain experiencing brownouts in certain areas of the brain. And so one of the things I want to introduce to the discussion and try to connect some dots. So let's start here. Women, once they go through menopause, start to accumulate iron at a much faster rate than they did all their life. Men accumulate iron at a much higher rate because there seems to be some special magic between testosterone and iron absorption and acquisition. We see that in drug-using athletes. I mean, I have to go donate blood every few months because I'm on TRT, and because I'm both Italian and Northern African, I have a propensity. I have one allele that makes me a much better iron absorber, which probably had a value through evolution for my ancestors. But now I'm injecting testosterone once a week. I eat beef every day, and I accumulate iron. Dr. Dale Bredesen came on the show one of the times he was here talking about his newly published book, An End to Alzheimer's. and indicated there's a specific type of Alzheimer's disease associated with high iron accumulation in the brain. Iron seems to stimulate insulin resistance, and high levels of insulin in and of themselves have an effect on constricting blood vessels. There's a stimulation of angiotensin converting enzyme in high insulin environments. ACE tightens up the small blood vessels. Those nerves go to sleep. Is the sleep reversible? We're looking into this now. But let's talk about iron for a second. How much iron do we really need in our body to perform efficiently?
Yeah, that's a good question. And some of it depends, are we talking men or women? I'm not an iron expert per se, but generally speaking, if we think about the RDA, just, the recommended dietary allowance that people would need, men, generally adults, 18 years and older, somewhere around 8 milligrams a day or so. Women, about 2 times that. So around 16 to 19. And a part of that is actually,
right.
That's right. A big part of that is menstruation, so, and that's an important thing for women to understand, because when we start thinking about this, whether you're an athlete or not, right, recreational, active included, biologic sex has a factor in this role, and that can increase propensities towards anemia. And anemia is when our red blood cells are not as good at acting the way they're supposed to. And that's because iron is critical for them. It's the main structure that holds that cell together and allows oxygen to be traveled through the body. So women do need more iron than men. And this becomes one of these pieces where, if you just think about vitamin tablets people take, there's a reason why they create vitamins for men versus women. And in part, it's iron. The iron levels are different in those types of vitamins. So, just when you say that, that's one thing to consider there, is just the person that we're talking about. And then on the same side, right, do athletes need more than, or recreationally active people, do they need more than, say, non-active people? That's a really debated area. I don't know if they necessarily need to focus on more iron, whereas I think a lot of the sports nutritionists would say that I'm colleagues with, they need to make sure they're eating enough. And if they eat enough calories and get that, they will get more iron in the diet, and that will be regulated accordingly. And I only bring that up to points of, I think, kind of the conversation we had earlier. There's a real fear of iron overload and some of the damaging effects it can have in the body.
So hemi-iron, which is attached to blood already, which we find in animal red meat, is much more available. The plant-based irons, not so much, unless you combine vitamin C, because vitamin C has the ability to increase absorption of non-hemi-iron, but also produce the protein in the liver, ferritin, which is a carrier of iron. Now we're starting to understand ferritin a little bit more also. High ferritin levels may be a good thing if you have high iron levels, because it sequesters it and keeps it from doing any damage. And eventually it deposits it in tissue, which isn't the greatest thing, but then you have to work to get it out. But my point for bringing this up is, women go through menopause, they stop bleeding, and doctors don't say adjust your iron level down now. And I really think that's a mistake. I think that doctors need to start paying attention to that to a greater degree, because iron is rust in your body. That's what it is. It really is. It is a pro-inflammatory. It's a pro-oxidant, powerful. It's probably the most oxidative, stress-producing nutrient you could store in your body is iron. And it also seems to aggravate insulin sensitivity. I think we need to start doing a deep dive and try to understand, not from an epidemiological standpoint, but like just how much iron does a person really need? Why are we telling them to take 8 milligrams a day without analyzing the iron? If you don't go to a doctor and ask specifically for total iron binding capacity, ferritin, and direct iron test to really triangulate how much iron is in tissue, how much iron is in blood, they don't even ask for iron tests anymore. They just assume if you didn't come in complaining about anything, you don't have an iron problem.
No, that's right. I think, most general tests are going to include things like your CBC that, we all hear about. And this is going to include things like your hematocrit levels and hemoglobin levels. And if they look at that and you're not saying you're tired or you're feeling, lethargic, yeah, they sort of move forward. And you're right. I think there's aspects of that we have to be careful about because, differentiating this, like if athletes are eating a lot more than say a non-athlete and they're getting more iron, well, they must be doing something that's creating movement of that iron, right? And what we sort of understand is within exercise, they're doing a lot of things that could actually need more iron. Like
Right.
every time they're running and lifting weight, they're breaking red blood cells down.
Bingo.
They're creating new red blood cells. And what that's doing is then using that extra iron that they're consuming. So it's not necessarily that it's just sitting around compared to somebody who say doesn't move that much, but they eat the same amount as an athlete. Now you're getting into these conditions that we're probably talking about disease related because now they're overeating, number one, which could be problematic for their body and producing lots of insulin that are unnecessary. But then two, that iron has to go somewhere and then it becomes stored. And to your point, iron's an oxidative stress inducer. And for something like the brain, that is incredibly problematic because unlike skeletal muscle has a good amount of antioxidants, and that can help safeguard the muscle cell from oxidative stress. It's not perfect. Oxidative stress still ensues and it develops insulin resistance in the muscle. And that's thought to be a major issue with type 2 diabetes. But at the same time, when we look at the brain, that's different. The brain doesn't have the same oxidative enzyme capacity that muscle does. So now you're talking about a tissue in our body that's vital to all that we do, and it doesn't have the same abilities to defend itself. So now if we're getting into issues here where we're taking in nutrients that are going to be oxidative stress inducing, we have issues with cell survival. And this becomes parts where maybe this is helping explain to an extent why people who are not as physically active, their brains are shrinking, they're atrophying from an oxidative stress standpoint.
Mhm.
And I don't know iron specifically, but that's a really interesting idea you bring up.
Well, the funny thing, you talk about bursting red blood cells. It happens easier than people think. In fact, when I go donate blood, they check my hematocrit first, and oh no, when I donate blood, the girl told me not to keep squeezing the ball once the blood starts flowing, because I can actually burst red blood cells. Then the bursted blood cells go into the bag. And runners, there was a study that was written probably about 3 years ago that made the supposition that the reason long distance runners become anemic is because the heel strike bursts all those red blood cells every step, and then I guess it's the spleen that is tasked with getting them out of the body. And so they literally need twice as much iron as other people because of the running just goes through red blood cells. It blows, which, by the way, completely shoots down the whole A1C theory if you're a runner, because you don't have blood cells for 90 days is holding still in your body.
No, it's true. The turnover is different. Yeah, jumping in, you made me think of a story that I've heard. So, once upon a time, I was more of a competitive athlete. Now I just try to keep moving. But there would be some people I knew who would describe when they're really working hard. This was really exertional activity patterns, but they started developing taste of metal in their mouth during these really hard workouts, right? This is not normal activity. This is really, you're going all out, trying to force your body to grow and get better. Well, kind of questions would be, what's that metallic taste? And a part of the thinking might be it's actually exertional hemolysis, right? So that thing you said where the red blood cell can break, we call that hemolysis, the breaking of the heme. Well, a thought is that when the blood is gushing through your lungs so fast, actually some of those red blood cells are bursting because it's sort of like bumper cars in there. It's bumping on the walls, the hemoglobin breaks, and you get some iron taste in your mouth. So you're right.
You're expiring it. You're expiring
right.
it.
Athletes, that could help explain some of these iron need differences as well. compared to the other piece. But you're right. There are things we're doing throughout the day that are good. These shouldn't be things that are concerning. They actually help promote the removal of older red blood cells that are more fragile and helps our body produce more from our bone marrow and so forth. So it's an interesting piece. But yeah, the connections here with iron and insulin resistance, I think it's an important caveat because we think insulin resistance is almost non-preventable. It's just going to happen, to your point. And that's not true. It's really something where insulin resistance is something we modulate every day. The more you sit, the more insulin resistant you're becoming. The less you sit, the less insulin resistant you're becoming. Changes in your sleep, movement patterns, and so forth, all very important for regulating that. And there is a piece where I think you're right. We've learned through over the years, great studies like the Baltimore longitudinal study. It's shown that as we age as adults, certain parameters like your blood glucose levels will start to rise. That seems to be a natural aging phenomenon. But when you look at other studies that have studied people across the lifespan, and people have concluded that aging causes insulin resistance, they often don't account for factors like exercise. And then once you match people and say, no, we're going to now look at physically active master athletes and age match them to people who are not exercising, you see those active people don't have insulin resistance. They're actually quite insulin sensitive, and in some ways they're as sensitive as their younger counterparts. So we really need to be careful about those ideas that this is going to be the inevitable. There's a lot of things we can do to prevent that, or at least delay really these onsets.
Did you I want to save this for the next, we have to take one more break. Did you extrapolate any information that could be prescriptive, for lack of better terms, that people who seem to do these things seem to have better insulin sensitivity in their brain?
Well, the reality is, Carl, there's only one study that's been done on this.
Okay, let's talk about let's hold it. Let's talk about that specifically when we come back. Okay, sit tight. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in. You carry a gun like I do, you are 300 times more likely to lose your gun. And 15% of those guns will end up in criminals' hands and used in the commission of a crime. GunLeash solves that problem. GunLeash is a patented, no-tracking proximity device the size of a postage stamp. It will alert you as soon as your gun is outside of your range, so you can never leave your gun behind. To learn more and to be notified when GunLeash is available at the end of January, go to gunleash.com and get on our mailing list. GunLeash. Never lose your gun, never leave your gun. BPC is one of the most amazing supplements you can use. It's been shown to increase the speed of recovery, heal the gut, and do so many other things. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound, and it's a naturally occurring peptide in the body. Used by professional athletes and weekend warriors alike, there has always been an obstacle in the way of average people using BPC, and that is it was injectable only. Not any longer, thanks to NutriNeeds. We now have oral BPC, and it works. Go to shrnetwork.biz/NutriNeeds, NutraNeeds. Use the code SHR and save 10% off your bottle of BPC. Feel better, recover faster, train harder. NutriNeeds.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Welcome back. Just a quick reminder, YouTube is targeting me. They want to get me off of YouTube. They have going back to shows 3 and 4 years ago, and giving me strikes for medical misinformation. Keep in mind, these shows were all studies we talked about with the authors of the studies. So if you are watching me on YouTube regularly, you may want to go to the website superhumanradio.net and at least sign up for the newsletter, because I predict my next strike or two, they're going to say, we're canceling your channel, and it's coming. If they're going back 3 years to find shows, that means they're working hard to get me off the air. So just be aware, superhumanradio.net is the website. Sign up for the newsletter, and you'll always be apprised of upcoming shows. So, I mean, can we simply say people start, the normal suggestion is, cardio 3 days a week, lifting 3 days a week, do them on alternate days, just start that way. Do you think that alone would have a preventative or a benefit for people who are starting to see cognitive decline?
So, yeah, there's a couple things with that. One, I think the general recommendation you just laid out is a good idea for anybody, whether they have cognitive impairments or not. It's a good place to start. I think it becomes a trick in knowing if somebody is say, dementia or mild cognitive impairments versus after diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Reason I say that is we just don't have as many studies, I think, really comparing and contrasting these prescriptions in the way that we have with, say, people with type 2 diabetes. I think there's more research on that. For example, with type 2 diabetes, it's been shown pretty convincingly, I think, although we need a lot more work from a weightlifting standpoint. But I think we right now, from the better clinical trials that have been done, show that when you do aerobic exercise plus weightlifting, so you're doing aerobic exercise about 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So, a good brisk walk to maybe some light jogging, and lifting. So now you're doing maybe medium to hard lifts 2 days a week. That 5-day dose right there is going to be very effective at lowering your hemoglobin A1Cs. But we don't have those types of head-to-head comparisons of, say, combinations of aerobic and weightlifting versus weightlifting only and aerobic only in the dementia world yet. But I think those studies are emerging right now, and I'm fortunate to be a part of some of these trials, looking at 150 minutes a week. And what we generally are seeing in collaborations with colleagues up in Newark campus of Rutgers, Mark Gluck is a great colleague, that physical activity is beneficial for neuroplasticity and cognition. So absolutely. I think the other thing to consider here is there are some studies that are pretty neat in that a lot of people would say, well, that's a lot of exercise to do, and I'm going to struggle to meet those goals. And I think that's really fair. And this is where I would say, circling back earlier, we were just talking about how maybe in a way we promote too much of this idea of get out there and do your 1 hour of exercise or 30 to 45 minutes, whatever that is. But we make it as you have to do it that set time. Rather, I would say there's some really neat work coming out showing changes in our brain blood flow can occur if you take breaks in sedentary behavior. So if you're somebody who maybe is at home, you're not able to move, or you're not going to work as much, or if you are at work and you're sitting a lot throughout the day, consider taking breaks throughout that day. And it could be something for maybe anywhere from 2 minutes of the hour. So not a lot, right? Just 2 minutes of time, or maybe 250 steps or so. If you do that each hour, there have been studies showing that people's cerebral blood flow is improved compared to people who are sitting all day. So if you think about it that way, we're talking about 2 minutes over 8 hours. That's 16 minutes of movement. If you look at it like that, that's not a lot to affect blood flow in the brain. And cerebral blood flow is thought to be one of the key potential mechanisms for developing dementia and cognitive impairment. So I think there's these balances we have to just consider to help people initiate these goals, move forward, and lead a more physically active lifestyle. And we could start simpler and then build up from there.
In fact, one of the things that I've espoused over the years is this start where you are concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just standing during the commercial breaks of your favorite TV shows is a great place to start. You know, if you're somebody that has ailments now, and you know you don't walk, and you couldn't walk a mile, and so you watch a TV show, commercial break starts, you stand up. Commercial break is over, you sit down. You do that throughout the whole show. Then you go from that to stay during the commercial breaks, walk around the sofa, assuming the furniture permits it. If not, walk around the small area of the room, and during the commercial breaks, and then sit. You start there. You start where you can. But if you stick with it and you follow the idea of progressing, eventually you'll be able to walk around the room, maybe take a bold step and walk out of the house and walk 5 minutes in one direction and 5 minutes back. And eventually that'll turn into walking a mile someday. It will. But you start where you are. So I like that. I think that's very doable. That includes everybody can participate. I like that a lot. I like that.
Yeah, no, I think your point's well taken. It's interesting from the standing point of view because, you know, years ago, work desks have all started changing, right? We went to standing work desk, and that's been a big piece. I think there's some evidence suggesting for orthopedic problems, you know, people with lower back issues, that could be a benefit. But I'm going to throw a little wrench here and say, you know, at least metabolically speaking, you know, so if we're concerned about, say, blood glucose levels, which have been linked to dementia, or even conditions like hypertension, which is also linked to dementia because we're talking about the blood vessels. Some of this idea that standing throughout the day compared to literally getting up and moving, they're showing conflicting results now. What I mean by that is standing alone, which I agree with you 100%. I think from a fitness standpoint, we have to start somewhere. And if that's what the person can do, that's better than nothing. But I think we also have to recognize that that should be relatively short-lived because the studies are supporting that in some ways, if you're standing and not doing anything, it's almost viewed as sedentary behavior still from an energy expenditure standpoint. So in that way, if the person is able to stand, but maybe just march in place very lightly, there's something about the muscle contraction process that way versus just standing that has been being suggested to be more beneficial to move towards these ideas of maybe regulating blood pressure, regulating the glucose levels. And nobody has specifically tested cognition to my knowledge that way. But if those factors influence cognition, one could hypothesize that would be better. But yeah, initial fitness is so important. And of course, too, medical clearance. We have to make sure people are cleared to be moving correctly.
Right.
So seeking their physician approvals and getting care that way, very important for their well-being.
And just for the sake of saying it, walking as slow as 1.5 miles an hour for 30 minutes improves something called vascular collateral changes, meaning that the small blood vessels start to open up and feed the tissue. And an hour is even better. So if you're somebody who has neuropathy, you can actually cure your neuropathy from walking because neuropathy is tied to poor blood flow to nerves. And increasing the vascular density by walking makes those blood vessels open back up that have been clamped down because of high levels of insulin and angiotensin converting enzyme. You can reverse that by walking. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, I have a hard time walking because my feet don't work right. My doctor says my balance is off because of my neuropathy. Yeah, that's true. And maybe, you know, walking around the sofa again, but or marching in place, start where you are. But what we're learning now is there's a phenomenon going on in our population today, in our culture. And we're not sure where it's coming from, really. I mean, we may find out it's all the RF from cell phones someday. I don't know. But we are having more and more people developing neuropathy that don't have type 2 diabetes, don't have high levels of blood sugar. It's hard to see that, you know, when you do a C-peptide and an insulin test, the insulin levels aren't raging, but why are their blood vessels clamping up the way they are? If something's going on. I always look to the lowest common denominator. What across all populations and substrata do we do? and I'm just going to say this, we all drink coffee. I don't know if coffee has the ability to constrict blood vessels day in and day out drinking coffee. I don't know. But what I am saying is something peculiar is going on. You know, everybody's got neuropathy, but not everybody's obese. Not everybody is diabetic. Not everybody, you know, something's going on. I just can't put my finger on it.
Yeah. You know, as an avid coffee drinker, I'd like to think that's not true.
I know. Trust me.
But you know, I think you bring up some points there, and you know, at least again, I'm not an expert, I would say, in this specifically, but from what I've seen, at least when it comes to, if we're talking about coffee, it's actually beneficial in some regards to conditions like diabetes and whatnot, because a lot of the phytochemicals, flavonoids that are within the coffee itself. The caffeine is another piece to that. You know, whether or not that's creating some of the issues that we're talking about is debatable. But I think something that we could probably feel good about is emerging work suggesting on levels that it may not be necessarily even the calories people are consuming, whether it's fat or carbohydrate per se, but rather whether it's processed or unprocessed.
Yeah.
And I think Kevin Hall has done some really elegant work on this, as among others. But I think we're learning more and more that to that idea of what is going on in our food, because carbohydrates and fats have been here for a long time in our history. We've been eating them for a while, and appreciating, you know, racial or cultural differences. Certainly, that's another caveat. But these nutrients have been around. I think the thing that has changed most in really the last 30, 50 years has been the processing of that food and the creation of hyperpalatability and sweetness and saltiness and so forth, that has changed the way it's interacting with our bodies. And we don't have a great handle on that, you know, especially then when it comes to issues like how insulin could be playing a role and how insulin could modulate the brain. That's really an understudied area. But, you know, what we do know is that at least on levels, insulin is vitally important for not only regulating the body and how the body handles blood glucose, but how insulin can also modulate the brain and affect things like our memory and ability to move, because insulin does act on the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is a critical piece to just human movement. So there are these facets that we really do need to kind of come back to start thinking about from a dietary point, for sure.
I agree. This has been a great conversation. Next time you have another study, please come back on. And let's
oh, thank you. No, I really appreciate the invite. Very kind of you, and I certainly would enjoy that.
Okay. All right, take care. And that's it for today. Oh, by the way, June the 11th, I turned 65 years old. I'm down to 221 pounds. My leanest at this level of musculature was 218. I'm going to try to get down to that. So what I'm planning on doing, usually on the anniversary of the show, I have guests that have been on in the past. I think this year for my 65th birthday, and sadly June 11th is a Sunday, so either that Monday or the previous Friday, I'm going to invite anyone in the audience who wants to be on the show with me. I'll post the links on Facebook. You can click the link. No one will be censored. Come on the show. If you think I'm an asshole, come on and tell me. But I think I'm going to celebrate my 65th birthday with the audience instead of previous guests that I've had on the show. And I hope people are brave enough to come on the show. I'd love to meet you and talk to you. And maybe you're somebody that we email sometimes, and come on and tell me what you think of me and wish me a happy birthday. So that's what I'm thinking about. Message me on whatever platform you watch the show and let me know if you think it's a good idea and if you would entertain coming on the show. Thanks. All right, Stephen, thanks a lot, brother, for being here. We'll see everybody. This is it. Next week, we have a lot of good shows. Tune in then. Don't forget, share the show. You never know whose life you're going to change.